My name is Cassandra Boulanger, one of the co-founders of Zero Waste Design Online. We're so grateful that you could join us tonight. So again, welcome to this Zero Waste Design Online community call. It's our 9th community call, which is quite exciting. And tonight we are focusing on finishing techniques for zero waste sewing and looking for you as a community to come in and kind of share your experiences and ask questions, and hopefully we can have a really great discussion. Just wanted to say thank you for your support. For those of you that donated a coffee at €2 to come to the event tonight, we really appreciate this. It helps support all the activities that we do. As you may know, we're a not-for-profit organization, and recently we have actually started a membership opportunity through our website, which Mylène is going to share a little bit more about if you're interested in supporting us more. We really believe in transparency as well, and we just wanted to talk a little bit about what our running costs are and what our needs are around the kind of membership and why we've gone down this road. So at the moment, our monthly running costs, covering the cost of our intern, Katrine, who's been an incredible help to us. I'm sure we'll be sharing more as the weeks and months come, some of the projects that she's worked on. Also our monthly subscriptions, things like accounting and Miro and Zoom and all that sort of things, around €210 a month. And then we pay for all our social media we pay someone €670 a month. And that obviously is not included in this is our total in-kind contributions. So all of the co-founders currently are volunteering our time. So if you do want to support us, we'd really appreciate that. We've got membership with different tiers as low as €2 a month. And for those that can't afford a membership, we do have volunteer opportunities as well, because we want to be as accessible as possible to as many people. So if you're in a position where you couldn't afford to support us to be able to access some of the things that we've put behind our membership wall, then please get in touch with us. And for as little as like 4 hours a month, we'd be happy to kind of do a swap for a membership so you can access everything. So for tonight, the aim is to share global best practice and to discuss experiences about finishing techniques for zero waste fashion design and zero waste home sewing. So our intentions are to build a supportive community for the further development of finishing techniques for zero waste design, to discuss experiences trying to implement different zero waste design finishes and techniques, and a bit of a show and tell of our zero waste garments and finishing techniques. So like I said, we'd love for you to share your projects. And just as a little reminder, so I don't forget at the end, we do have another community call coming up on the 7th of December, which is going to be our 10th community call, and it's what can be made from waste. So gift ideas for things that can be made from waste. And again, we're inviting the community to come and share things that you've been working on, or projects, and we'll share some of our ideas as well. So you can keep an eye out for that. So I'm going to just stop sharing now and invite anyone in the community who has anything they'd like to share to speak up and can start the conversation. I can see Liz trying to put mute off. Hi, Liz. Nice to see you.
Hi. Well, I could start with a few things.
Okay.
I have a few things to show and tell, but I also have a tip. And the tip is with sewing techniques. If you can find really old sewing books, like pre-World War II sewing books, there are often some really great gems in them that are great to try out yourself. And I got this book, it's called Modern Needlework. I got it from a community garage sale. I think it might be 1930s, because a lot of 1930s books had the word modern in the title. And this is what the inside looks like. Like that.
I actually have the same book, Liz. I can't remember where I got it from, but I have the same one. It's great.
was in better nick than mine. Mine's had a hard life. Look at the cover.
Yeah, mine's in like almost pristine condition.
Wow. Wow, so it made it between Scotland and Australia somewhere.
I wonder where it was published. Does it say? Mine's in the other room, otherwise I'd grab it. But
can you say the name of the book again as well? Sorry.
Oh, it says, oh, this is the title page. Is that back to front for you?
no,
Modern Needlework.
Yeah.
It says a Daily Express publication. So maybe someone coming out to Australia brought it.
That's cool. Yeah, I really enjoy like, older sewing books, even for teaching sewing. I like the detail that you get in kind of older kind of how to sew books. It's really interesting.
And the show and tell I have is two things that I use quite a lot, or find myself using quite a lot with Zero Waste. And the first is the slot seam, which I never really use, but I seem to be using it quite a lot. And it's just a way to highlight a seam. So this is the front of a pinafore, and the slot seam, it's just the seam allowance with the edges folded under, and then on the back, stitch a backing. That's the width of 2 seam allowances. And I did mine with, I overlocked all the edges first, and then I pressed it under, and then I just stitched it on. But the denim was a bit thick. And you could put a coloured, like a contrast bit under that if you wanted to. And people send me messages and say, do I have to put this in? So this is a pattern I sell. They say, do I have to put the slot seam in? And I say, well, you don't really have to, but there's not much else. There's not many other design features on this. This was sort of like the
So do you fold this? You fold the seam allowances back, you overlock and finish them, and then you put a panel, like a facing panel on the other side, which could be the contrast fabric.
Yeah, and then just top stitch it on.
Okay.
Except because this was like a structural seam, this is like the centre front and centre back seam. Also, and I was using top stitching thread on a long stitch. I went back and then like ordinary machine stitched just the edges, because if there's strain on it and one strand breaks, then there's not anything else holding it.
So when you've top stitched it, how did you top stitch it in a way that you don't see the top stitching through to the right side of the garment?
You top stitch on the right side.
Oh, so it is visible. Okay, maybe I just didn't see it.
So you like pin the backing on. You pin the backing on, and then just stitch down each side with a foot width, giving you the guide. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. I didn't see the top stitching. I was like, how did you do that?
Oh, because I so perfectly match my thread. That's why.
Well done.
And the other thing I use a lot is bias binding lots. Mm-hmm. So I use it in 2 ways. I use it as a facing. So this is the Xanthia top. So I use it as like a facing on necklines, and you have to use just the 1/2 inch, the wider, like 1 inch wide bias bindings, too wide. You can't get around the curves properly. I use that a lot. And the other way I use it is just as binding. And it's great because you don't need any extra material for it. If you haven't got any way to, if you haven't got any extra fabric to finish your edges, then binding or binding as a facing is so versatile. Yeah. And when you tip is to match the weight of your binding fabric to the fabric you're binding. Don't come in.
I might have one of those knocking at some point too.
I think it's a small person up late at 4:30 in the morning. So I used quilting cotton for this binding on a blanket because polycotton bias binding that I buy from the shops was too thin, and you need to make sure that the entire edge is inside the binding. If the binding's just kind of sitting on the edge, when you go to press it, you get a line because you've got empty binding. So you need to make sure it's grabbing the whole edge.
I just taught bias binding. I'm teaching a zero waste wardrobe class right now in Glasgow, just like home sewers, and I just taught bias binding. But I'm interested. Do you use the continuous bias binding method where you cut it from a square? Like, how do you cut your bias binding?
I've cut a lot of bias binding in factories because I used to work in a uniform factory, and we just got a long length of fabric, and I say it's 112 centimeters wide. We just folded it in half and cut diagonal strips. You end up with 2 triangles in the corner, but you can actually cut down quite a long way into the corner. So I just use strips and join them. Okay. And then I try not to get a join at a like center front. Yeah. So I move my joins around so they're at the back and that kind of thing. Okay. I find it's the quickest way to do it. If you cut a you know how you cut a, sorry, I can't think very well. If you cut like a parallelogram and then join it so you've got an offset strip and then just cut round and round and round, you have to cut that out by hand, and it's slower. Yeah, you're cutting out one layer by hand.
It definitely takes more time. I think it's beneficial. Like, I'm sure you've seen sewing patterns when they've got, like, you know, maybe a reasonably good layout, you know, or average 15% waist, 20% waist, whatever. But then they have the bias binding piece, which makes you use like you have to buy an extra half a meter from the shop just for this bias binding piece. So that's where I recommend that, you know, using a square, making the parallelogram, and doing that, particularly for home sewers. I think for industry, it doesn't, you know, time-wise, it's not something that would necessarily be adopted, but I think it's a good method for home sewers, just to reduce even the amount of fabric they need to buy for a garment. Yeah.
Agree. And if the bias binding is cut in the same fabric, if you position that first in your cutting layout, often edges of sleeves and things like that, you can cut around it quite neatly.
I just put myself on mute. I'm just looking up I'm going to put the method that I use for continuous bias tape in the chat, just in case there's anyone that would like to follow a tutorial. I'm going to create a tutorial at some point for Zero Waste Design Online, but for now, I've always used, I think I learned this technique like 7 or 8 years ago or something, but just through Colette Patterns, or an American pattern company. So the link's there if you'd like to try it yourself. It's pretty good. It's pretty easy to follow. So anytime you've got like that kind of wasteful bias strip in a sewing pattern, you can use this method, and you just need basically like a 10-inch square of fabric. So it saves a lot. Yeah.
I think Megan Nielsen had a tutorial on how to cut a lot of bias binding at one time.
Okay.
But I didn't look it up before this because I only just thought of it.
Well, you could always share it at some point if you find it. Yeah. For those of you that don't know as well, Liz Haywood is the author of Zero Waste Sewing, which is a really wonderful book of zero waste patterns, lots of great techniques and stuff as well. So maybe we can pop a link in for your book as well, Liz. So she's full of good tips.
Oh, thank you. There is a tutorial in the book for cutting. There's a tutorial in the book for using bias binding as a facing like this, but there's also a tutorial on my website, which I'll just type in the comments, in the chat, sorry. I think it's in the November 2020 archive.
Liz is very committed to these.
I know the January.
It's 4:30 for you in the morning. Is that what you said?
No, it was 4:30 because we've just switched to daylight saving time. So like 4:30 is not as hard as 3:30.
Still very.
I might even stay up afterwards.
Great. Thanks for popping that in. Lovely. Thanks for sharing, Liz. Is there anyone that has any questions about what Liz has shared? Does it kind of make sense what she's said? Or please let us know if you have any questions. And you can also put your questions into the chat bar as well if you'd prefer, rather than speaking up. But also if you've just got a project you'd like to share, or finishing techniques you'd like to share yourself as well, we would love to see them.
I did have a thought about that slot seam, because it could be an interesting way to add like a little bit of ease or fullness in areas of a garment too. So that would be a fun design feature to play with.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, it's a really good idea.
Yeah.
This is what is great about this community call, this kind of setting, is just to be able to bounce ideas off of each other and, you know, come up with new ways of using things, or, you know, pushing zero waste forward as well, you know, having a kind of open conversation about these kind of techniques. So it's great. I've heard of a slot seam, but I've never actually seen it in that application. So it was nice to see it.
How do you spell it? As a non-English speaker, like I don't know the terminology of the seams in English.
I just put it in the chat.
Okay, great, thanks. Slot seam. All right.
Yeah, but it would be very interesting, just like, yeah, to shape around contours of the body using the excess in the slot as well.
Hi Liz, just a question. How thick is the slot seam? Like how far apart are the two pieces generally?
I just pressed under the seam allowances and I just had them touching, and I had 1.5 centimeter seam allowances, so that meant the backing was 3 centimeters.
Oh, okay.
But you could, I think it depends on how wide you want to do the stitching. So mine is like a foot width, like 6 millimeter, but you could do it with a centimeter seam allowance. You just need to put your stitching in a little bit so that you catch the back when you stitch.
All right, thank you.
I think I saw Claire maybe putting your hand up as well if you had a question.
Yeah. Thank you. It's lovely to be here tonight. It's like so exciting. And Liz, thank you for getting up in the middle of your night, because I follow Liz and I've got your book on my Christmas list. So, and I bought the pattern for the Xanthi top. So I'm on that one next.
Oh, cool.
And the person that I have been doing a lot of is Birgitta Helminson, obviously. She's like, you know, genius. I'm very short and I have a big difference between my widest sort of hip, full bust, full butt, and my waist. It's nearly 12 inches difference. So zero waist for me can be a problem because a square does swamp me. So following on from Liz's ideas, what I've really been experimenting with when I've been making stuff from Birgitta's styles is tucks. I am a real fan of tucks. What you get is you get a lot of, you can do a lot of top stitching. Obviously, I've got a lot of top stitching around the bottom because I needed to bring it up, because otherwise it just isn't flattering if it's too long on me. But I didn't want to cut the fabric off. So it's sort of self-facing, but also tucks. And what you'll see on the one that I've made here, which is in a fantastic hem, which is a Merchant and Mills hem, is I've managed to get, I'm quite pleased with it. I still think when I wear it, I still have quite a bit of fabric here. So I'm going to experiment a bit on that. But what I've managed to do is, by putting a yoke in, I've got my gathers and then I've got my tucks here to bring it in. But here I've got all that space. And I think if, you know, Cassandra, if you're doing workshops with people like me that have that big variation in shape. That sort of hourglass shape. Tucks, I think, are really forgiving because you can get a nice shape, but darts, I did experiment with darts and I found darts were a bit, well, they're unforgiving because they bring the shape in and then there's no space at all, you know, no give at all. So I'm definitely going to be looking at the slot seam without a doubt. And then the other thing I just wanted to show, which is my latest obsession, which is zero waste, completely the other way around. So I don't know if I am older than everybody else on this call, but I may have had more years collecting fabric than some of you, and I've been gifted from godmother, from mother and grandmother. So we've got a lot of years of fabrics and I don't throw it away, obviously. So what I've got here is, wrong way around, the beginnings of zero waste, but it's the other way around. So it is actually a pattern. It doesn't have to be square, but you build the pattern by this. And obviously it's a long way off being finished. It'll be heavily embellished. So that's just like another, it's hugely time consuming. It's never gonna, you know, it's never gonna go. This is only the beginning of it, but it's another, it's the same thing about looking at a shape and saying, how can I fill that shape? And in these two techniques, they're like the opposite ends of each other. Some of this fabric probably is 40, 60 years old, maybe bits of it. It's just been handed down, and some of it is very modern. So I think as a political statement, I'll probably do some, well, I will do some embroidery, but as a political statement about who makes our clothes, who makes our fabric, and the value of our fabric and the undervaluing of our fabrics. And we know about factory conditions. We know, but lots of other people don't. So I think that's the other side of all of this. And I'm looking forward to December because I think that's another way we can make things from scraps, because we could make small things. I mean, I've decided to make a big workwear jacket. So I've set myself a bit of a challenge there, but I've got time. Thank you.
It's amazing. So you're making that into, you said, a workwear jacket, and is that the kind of first panel you've done, the back?
Yeah, so that's the back, and then I've also done, it's not finished, the back, whoops, it's gone on the floor. The pockets are finished. Well, I would say they're finished. They're not actually finished because then every so often I think they need something else on them. So that's one of the pockets. There are 4 pockets so far. I've loosely based it on a free pattern which came from Fabric Store, which I think is an American resource, and they work in linen. So I thought it would be good. So, you know, all credit to them really, but it is a very boxy shape. So it won't have any darts in it, but I can get the shape in the pattern, and I've adapted the pattern to my shape. Obviously, by the time you've sewn so many pieces of fabric together, you've got limits around manipulating it. So you'd almost need to do that first. But I thought for this one, I'd just go quite boxy, and then it'll just be a really nice thing to wear when I'm doing my creative things.
Liz has just asked a question there. So did you start with the backing?
For the jacket, yeah, no, because it's not, I've actually done it, it's really, I haven't backed it. So it's not backed onto one piece of fabric. I've got a twirl, which I may line it with, but that isn't the way around I've done it. So I think one could do it either way. One could do a garment and then add the fabric onto the backing, or this way round, which is where you're literally sewing together tiny bits of fabric, and there are problems around it, particularly if, like me, you're using I am on the whole using wovens, but as I'm starting to build up the structure, I'm finding that I can get away with using, so long as I'm putting them on top of other wovens, I can use, but they're all different weights. And the main sort of rule at the moment is the colours. So I've stuck with the greys and blacks and the whites and the neutrals, but then I'm starting to add other colours, pops of colours. So yeah, I'd be interested, you know, if anyone else sets off on this journey, let's all keep in touch, because it'd be nice to know if other people, probably this isn't, I mean, this is probably a bit more long-winded, but it's also very satisfying because you're literally building fabric. Yeah. And you understand how hard it is. And then when you go and look at, we have a shop, Sainsbury's here. Do you all have Sainsbury's? TU clothing, and there's a t-shirt for like £3, and you look at the fabric and you think that didn't get made for £3.
Yeah, it's questionable for sure. Yeah, I actually use the same method for my master's collection for a coat that I made for my master's collection. So I designed the pattern to a specific silhouette, and then it was actually the last garment I made of my collection. So I did a zero waist collection, but I used the last bits of some of the offcuts of one of my other patterns that wasn't a zero waist pattern in order to build the coat up. I could show you the coat if you'd like to see it.
Love to see it. Yeah.
It's so heavy. I quilted it, so it's, I can put it on so you can see, but yeah, so I built it's a big patchwork.
Beautiful.
Yeah, but I just played, you know, with the colors that I had left and kind of built up all the pieces to the pattern, and that's kind of how I, you know, managed making my collection zero waist as well, without having all zero waist patterns, was to just use what I had left. Yeah, so
fantastic.
It's great. It's nice to see someone else working in that way as well.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Claire, or kind of feedback on that, or another project to share?
Claire, did you do it all by machine?
In the initial stages, I did. And because I love working with my machine, it's a very visceral thing for me. My sewing machine, it's like a part of my body, and I mean, I still work, but most times during the day I'll find some time to use it. But now that I've got some structure, I'm starting to add in some hand embroidery. So now we're beginning to get a little bit of hand embroidery going in. And I think other people might know of Judy Willenmentroth. Have I said her name correctly? She's an amazing, she is just an incredible maker, and she's made some phenomenal things. But the thing she's working on at the moment, she's called it the Hexy dress, and it's all these tiny little hexagons. So she inspired me, I should say. Hats off to Judy, because I think she's Canada, no, she's Australia, right? Or New Zealand, possibly. And she, I'll write it in, but she does more geometry. You know what I'm trying to say there? More specific shapes. Not always, but for this piece. And she does a lot of hand sewing. So her hexagons have all been hand sewn, but I have actually decided to go for the structural work by machine, and then do some hand stuff to really, when I know what the background looks like, because you can't design this. I mean, I have designed it in my brain, obviously, but I haven't been able to draw it. It's kind of literally being made by my hands. So I'll put her name in. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for sharing.
Claire, sorry, what about the raw edges of the fabrics?
Now, that's a really good question. I think that might be one reason why I need to back the back. So it might be that my twirl does get it backed. And that would also give a bit more structure if I then want to do some hand quilting. I think there are issues around that in terms of waste. We know that. It's not a garment designed to be washed. It's very much a jacket. I wouldn't like to wash it for the reason that you would lose a lot of threads. But also some of how I'm going to try and deal with that is that's where the sewing machine comes in, because you then have got the potential for doing very dense embroidery with a sewing machine. So that's just a blanket stitch there, which that red is a blanket stitch, and you've got the potential of sewing over and over. But I think that is a really, really good question. Is it Daya? That's something that's occupied my brain a bit the last week, about the environmental effects of a piece of clothing that might shred. It's always going to be a balance, isn't it?
I mean, part of it probably is in like you're talking about the care of it as well, like as you wear it and how you care for it. And you may need to wash it, but it might be about kind of spot cleaning and, you know, that sort of thing. And passing on, like what I find interesting as well is this conversation about passing on information with the garment as well, you know, like whoever it goes to next, you can kind of provide a bit of that story, and you can talk about how it needs to be washed in order to last as well. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing, Claire. There he is.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, I'm pretty new on this zero waste, and I've tried only a few patterns that I found online, but I found it really exciting. And I tried, I think it's Holly's Make and Use, something like that, is it called? So I tried with the basic one, and as I didn't have any seam allowance on that, what I did, I don't know if you can see that. Do you know this thing?
Yeah, it's a kind of, I can't remember the name, but it's like a lace kind of.
Yeah, it's a kind of lace. So it's a lace that has some fabric on both edges. They sell it like that. So that's what I used. Instead of having seam allowance, I used this one that worked for me as a seam allowance. And I put it in all the seams around the garment. So you can actually see, I don't know if you can see it. You can actually see all the seams that I made, the armhole and everything. I just made it with this. So
Amazing.
as well for when you don't have seam allowance.
Yeah, that's great. I think I actually have some of that in my
Yeah, I don't know
somewhere.
how is it called in English. So, but
Does
yes,
anyone know? Like, I'm not
I
sure what
think
it's called.
one of the names is faggoting.
Faggoting.
It's something similar to that.
Okay, faggoting.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure about this,
Like
but I
this.
think there are two T's.
Yeah, I think it's like this. I have heard of faggoting up.
Well, that's all that I can afford. I'll try some more.
And then Liz also commented that it's in, I'd say insertion lace. Liz said lace insertion. So I think usually faggoting is when you're hand embroidering it.
Okay.
And then the lace insertion is when it's like you can buy it as a trim. I think. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I have no
Yeah,
idea.
I think so too. Like faggoting is when you put it together and then you have to like sort of do it on your own.
So, because I was gonna, maybe if it came up, I'd share. This is one of Holly's. I'm actually repairing this. This is one of the original make use garments, and she calls it Insertion Stitch. So you can see around the neckline there. That's a stitch. So actually, like she drew out or placed one of the other neckline shapes onto the garment and then cut it and kind of stitched it together, and then used a different neckline just as a kind of a design feature. But I'll put a link. The Make Use website does have a couple good tutorials. I know they have one for tutorial, or one tutorial for the insertion stitch, and then they have another one for, this is another one of Polly's garments. But I don't know if you've seen painting the edges before. So you can just paint the raw edges of your fabric. So you can see it like this is a little ruffle. Just try and find like a ruffle like that. It's quite a nice finish. The only thing, like particularly if you have like any sensory issues, it's quite like scratchy feeling. So like on the outside of the garment and stuff, it might be slightly nicer, but I know it's something that Holly's taught a lot in her workshop. So it's just like any kind of household paint, and you can buy like little tester pots if you want different colors as well. So you can obviously, you can get to like a hardware paint shop, then you've got lots of colors, like tons and tons of colors that can be mixed to match your fabric or contrast your fabric. I think the back there as well, like that neckline, that's the make use neckline that's stitched down as well. It's kind of been finished with the paint like that. So yeah, but it's, yeah, so I guess it's kind of like, yeah, it's like that kind of insertion. Seam insertion.
Sorry, do you know how the painting would like work when you wash it?
I think that it washes okay. I haven't actually washed that garment. Does anyone else know for sure? But I think, like, I know that when I've got house paint on my clothes, when I'm painting and you wash it, it doesn't wash out. So I haven't washed that garment, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't wash out. I do find you get just like a small amount of fraying still. So it's a bit of just like trimming like tiny little frays that come after wearing a garment a little bit. So it's just kind of being aware of that and cleaning it up a little bit. But you get that even with a zigzag stitch seam finish as well. You'll get little bits of frayings that, you know, need to be cleaned as well. Claire says, Mutsu is wonderful by hand. Is this like a, Claire?
Yeah, if you look above, Yulia, sorry, Yulia, have I said your name right? She was also referencing Prospective Flow, and his work is just beautiful to watch. I don't know where he stands on zero waste exactly, but his hand sewing is just beautiful.
I'm going to check that out. I haven't actually heard of him before, so thank you. Great, thanks for sharing that. And I said I was going to put the make use link in as well, so I'll do that too. In the meantime, if there's anyone else that has questions or wants to share.
I have some things that I could share.
That would be great.
Okay. So these garments are not exactly zero waste. They're all based on historical patterns that I'm hoping to eventually make zero waste. But in the spring, I made a couple costumes for a short film. And I was under a time crunch, and I also was at a school and I didn't feel like fighting with the serger to see if it worked and setting up the serger. So I had to do some, like, I was just like, I just want any finish that I need to do to be all by machine. So this is based on like a regular like Italian chemise type thing. And then, sorry, it's, of course it's the right side out, so, but we have to turn it inside out. So I ended up doing mock French seams on all of these edges. So this is a linen, just a plain weave linen. I don't know how well we can see this. And I was going to be a little bit worried about the gussets under the arm, because it's square, and I was wondering how on earth it would fit together. But it actually ended up working out really well. I'm still not entirely sure how I put it together, but it was kind of like just sew one seam at a time and then hope that the next one works too. So again, what's cool about this is that I could go back in and finish all of the seams after I had finished the garment. So yeah, ordinarily I don't like to work that way, but I was fitting it in the process as well. So that's the one. Then the second costume I had less time to work on, so I wasn't able to go in and do all of the seams with the mock French seams. I actually ended up putting it on the actor without finishing any of the seams because we ran out of time. And then I did pink the seams, which is not something I'm very familiar with. I'm so used to overlocking everything. I wasn't sure how well the pinking would hold up. And then I went back in and folded the seams over and then top stitched them down. So I don't know how well we can see here. The seam is closed because it likes to flop around. And then like, this is the seam, the way it's pressed, but you know, linen has a mind of its own. So this one I'm curious about. I kind of want to wear this garment and just see how well this holds up. Because again, the linen is a little bit frayy. It's not super tightly woven.
Yeah.
So again, this is kind of like an experimental garment of, oh, I wonder how this will hold up to long-term wear and washing.
So it basically was pinked, pressed under, and then stitched.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The fun thing about linen is that I could like finger press it as I went, and then I gave it like a final press with the iron. And then this was my first attempt at an 18th century shirt. So the other gray one was my second attempt. And this one, I sewed all of the seams by machine, and then I felled the seams by hand. And that was because this one was more like for fun and to test out the pattern. It does give it a really nice, like more historical kind of hand sewn look, but obviously it's not going to be practical for any sort of production. But the pro of this one is that you can watch lots of fun YouTube videos or TV shows while you're finishing it. So
I love hand sewing for that reason. I mean, I just love hand sewing in general, but when you've just got a project that you can kind of pick up when you've got a show on or something, it's really nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are pretty basic seam finishes, but I wanted to show them in real life, and yeah.
Thanks for sharing. I've actually got one of my students, Tracy's, on the call. She's in my beginner sewing class, but we just did seam finishes last week, so helpful tips and stuff for her as well.
I have a question with the French seam and the flat felt seam and stuff. It's for everyone. I tried using it for the sleeve because I couldn't be bothered to like get a overlocking machine or something like that. But I noticed like it makes it a bit difficult to move. So what would you guys suggest, like with the, you know, the sleeve areas mainly? Because with flat felt, it kind of just makes it, I don't know the word for it, like very rigid sort of thing.
Yeah.
So anyone has any ideas? Especially with like thicker fabric, like denim or something.
The more rows of stitching that you put on a seam, the more rigid it gets. So if you sew the seam and then you flat fell it or something like that, you've got at least 2 rows, and especially on thicker fabrics, you'll end up with quite an inflexible seam.
Also, hand sewing will be a little bit softer than machine sewing, too?
Yes,
Mhm.
agree. I think it's more softer and flexible.
Okay, we'll try hand sewing it and put on a good show.
Do you think doing a French seam rather than a flat sit felled seam, like obviously you've still got the same kind of bulk in the seam, but would you have slightly more kind of movement rather than having the kind of, you know, 2 rows of stitching maybe? I don't know, Liz, what do you think? Like, I mean, obviously you see flat felled seams more often on a shoulder seam in a shirt, for example. That's like, you know, the normal seam to see, but do you think you'd get Liz has written a book about sewing as well, so I know she's got lots of tips, but you know, do you think that would feel more kind of flexible in that sleeve seam if it was a French seam?
One thing you can do instead of doing a French seam round an armhole is you can bind the armhole. You could do it 2 ways. You could sew the armhole seam as normal and at the same time stitch in a piece of very lightweight binding and then hand sew the binding down. So you've got 1 row of hand sewing, 1 row of machine sewing. Or if you've got a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, you could sew the seam, trim one back and then bind it with its own seam allowance and hand sew that down too, so it's not as rigid. So then you've still got 1 by machine, 1 by hand.
Okay.
And sometimes on French seamed garments, this armhole is bound, either because it's got gathers on it maybe, or it doesn't really work with the ease, or it's too curved or something like that. Anyway, there's some ideas to try out.
Okay, thank
Oh,
you.
tiny piping.
Yeah, I saw that too. What do you mean by tiny piping? Like just
I use for lingerie, for example, but it's not a very thick material like cotton or things like that. I mean, I got it. The seam allowance is really tiny as well, and I do like a 2 centimeters piping, so it's half, and then half. So when you fold it, it's just half centimeter, and it's really, really tiny, and you can or hand stitch it, you know, or top stitch it, and it doesn't bother that much.
okay.
As well, you can give a little bit of ease at the armhole as well if it bothers too much, and if it's a very thick fabric, maybe you can give it a little bit more of ease, so it's better to move inside maybe.
Okay, thank you.
I have something I can share.
Great, Stacey, thanks.
I haven't made too many zero waist, but this is a really simple top with maybe some interesting edges. So it's like a tank top. So I think I had like 5/8 of a yard of fabric. So I used it on the cross grain and I cut it in 2 pieces. And then I stitched it together. Let's see. I have seams just going to the outside, and then I use some heavier thread to zigzag it, top stitch to the outside. And then the shoulders, you know, so I had this neck and I had fat shoulders, so I twisted it inside itself to make like a twist at the top of the arm. And then it was kind of long because it was 30 inches because of the width of the fabric. So on one side, I put a casing through that fat seam allowance to lift one side up. So it's basically a 1/2 inch seam allowance that's all gone to the outside. But of course, when I came to the neck and the armhole, I stopped it. And then it's just top stitched all around the whole seam. So that's it.
So did you say you zigzag stitched it down like to the fabric so you can see the zigzag stitch through?
Yeah, so it's like a decorative.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see that right there? So this is the outside. So the seam allowance is turned to the outside, and then I just zigzagged it along the edge.
Yeah.
And it's knit so it doesn't ravel. So the armhole's the same. Gotta go backwards.
Great.
Nice.
So that was a little trick just to make it look more interesting. And I solved the problem of how was I going to finish the neck and the seam allowance. And so that's it.
It's nice and just kind of come up with creative ways of fixing problems maybe as well. And yeah.
Okay, I'd like to share. So this isn't zero waste, but it's upcycled. So I used older fabrics like menswear things to make this top. So I've kept because it's made out of menswear jackets, I've kept the lining that was there and then used that to sort of continue on. So a lot of parts I had to hand sew the lining together, and I can't find where I did it. Here, somewhere here. Yeah, so this part it's black on black. It's a bit tough to see, but it just sort of put the lining in, and then so everything is just sandwiched together for this. So that was fun because I literally didn't have to use any seam allowances as such. So everything was just hidden in itself. But some of the lining, I had to get creative and make really strange shapes, like with this.
That looks really interesting.
Thank you. So this was the inside, but I guess you could also try and do something like this for the outside. So it's like just a design feature you could work on to hide everything, like put it all inside each other, and nobody knows where it starts from and where it ends. So it's got like different colored linings as well, because it's like a bunch of different materials. So that was a fun project I tried.
It's a nice way of using like a lot of different garments, and yeah, like for upcycling and stuff, but I think it's like really effective. It looks really nice.
Yeah, because a lot of things had like leftover lining or materials, and I just put those together for the inside, and the outside is like crisp and you can't really tell what's happening on the other side.
Yeah, it's really nice. Thanks for sharing, Dea.
Thank you.
I'm on mute. I'm kind of turning mute off and on. We've just got 5 minutes left. I don't know if there's anyone else that would like to share for the last 5 minutes or any last kind of questions before we wrap up. I did bring a couple more things from my collection to share as well, which I can show, and if anyone has any other questions. But so I was talking about my master's collection a bit earlier, but this was a zero waste pattern, and actually this pattern has sleeves, but I ended up, because I ran out of fabric for my jacket, I didn't have enough fabric, the jacket I showed you earlier, so the sleeves are actually used in the jacket, like as extra fabric, the kind of patchwork. But I used the make use neckline and then just used the kind of bias binding like that and stitched it down by hand. So I don't know if you'll be able to see from the back, but you can kind of see like tiny yellow, I don't know if you'll be able to see that through, but there's just tiny little yellow pricks which match. I don't have a lining in this one, it's this other one. So this pattern makes two dresses basically. The one pattern makes two, but I have like the yellow lining as well in here. And so I just cut out the lining out of the pattern as well, and then just kind of like hand stitched that neckline down over the lining at the back, and decided to leave, I understitched it, but it was kind of like popping up a little bit still, and I decided to kind of leave that little kind of pop of yellow. But again, that's like all these fabrics were kind of left over. They're either from my kind of own fabric stash. I didn't buy any new fabric for my collection, so it's just kind of showing that you can make an effective like collection using secondhand materials, or I mean, I did have a reasonably sized personal fabric stash at that point. But yeah, I really enjoy using the bias binding and just like actually hand finishing it down as well, just like a little prick stitch. It's quite effective. And I, as I said, really enjoy kind of hand sewing Yeah, and there's a couple little things. I'll probably share these in the next kind of gift. We're going to talk about Christmas gifts in the next one. But a friend of mine in Glasgow here has a company. She makes quilts from cashmere salvages. So the salvages of the cashmere don't get used. And there's a company, Johnson's of Elgin's, one in Scotland that produces cashmere. And my friend Deborah takes all of the cashmere salvages and weaves them together by hand and then hand quilts them, which is a really interesting way of using, again, offcuts and wastes. But we can kind of maybe look at ways of making smaller projects out of that maybe for Christmas as well. And I've got another one back here, which is Quilted Waist. So my friend Lydia put this quilt together, and it's made on a long arm quilting machine, but she used to have an underwear, she made bras and pants business, and she quilted all the waist in, so it's silk organza top, and then there's a kind of tencel, soft tencel backing, and all of the waist is quilted, so you can see the lines of quilting. So that's done with a long arm quilting machine, and that's all the waist sandwiched between. Yeah, but just with the colors, it's like really quite, I think, effective. She wants to make a zero waist coat out of this, but it's an interesting way for kind of brands to use scraps from projects and stuff too. I'm going to be teaching in my zero waste wardrobe class. We've kind of looked at some other things as well, but making a little kind of pot holder example of this sort of thing. But yeah, so that's my last little share. But before we wrap up, does anyone have any kind of last questions or contributions?
With your master's collection, have you worn it out a lot?
A bit. The dresses I've worn quite a bit. The jacket is like, it's quilted, it's actually got wadding in it, and it's made, a lot of it's tweed, Harris tweed, which is a tweed that comes from the north up in Scotland here, and it's so warm. Like even in Scotland, like sometimes it gets cold enough here, but not really. I'm just like, it's too warm to wear regularly actually. So I've worn it a few times. Yeah, that was like one of the kind of outcomes I wanted for my master's as well. It was something wearable. I wanted to be able to use the collection after, because I know so many students just make these collections and then like give them to the charity shop. Or I mean, I've seen collections at uni in the waste, like in the bin as well. Like people just throw them out afterwards. So I wanted to, yeah, make something that I would actually wear, or at least I could give it to someone who would wear. So yeah, dresses, the two dresses I wear quite a bit.
And did the difference in materials, like, did it have an effect as you kept wearing it and using it?
No, it was okay. Like a lot of similar weights. Like I just made sure that the weights of the fabric kind of worked well together. Obviously the jacket has slightly heavier fabrics. And then if a fabric was too light, but I really wanted to use it, then I would back it with interfacing, just to give it kind of a similar weight to the other fabrics. But it's worn okay. I'm just trying to remember the ones that I didn't, like this one, I kind of did a big facing that just has a facing panel for the bottom because it's got this big circle and I didn't want those seams to rub. So there's a big facing in that, but like the inside's just, it's all overlocked on the edges. So it's, you know, I just overlocked everything. Can't remember if I did it before, maybe after I stitched it, and it's worn fine. And then this one obviously has the lining in it. Pretty sure I still overlocked. Yeah, everything's still overlocked in that, but it's just got the lining over it. Yeah, so yeah. Nice to share some of my collection. But yeah, I guess we can maybe wrap up. Is there any last questions? Yeah, I can see.
I have a question. You mentioned the make use neckline a few times. Can you explain a bit more about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of the Make Use collection that Holly developed, she created neckline templates that are free downloads. And I'll just grab actually I saved the link. I'm gonna send you first the if you're interested in booking for the next community call about zero waste Christmas kind of ideas, I've just put the link in there, and then I'll find the link for the neckline. So I think basically each garment. So if you go to the Make Use website, and then if you go to each garment, basically there's downloadable neckline templates. I've got one right here. So that's one for, so this is the neckline that I used for this one. So it's like, it has to have an opening because the neckline's too small, you wouldn't get your head through, but you could have a little button loop, but I decided I wanted to kind of keep that open. So that's, you know, the smallest neckline here, and then you've got different sizes, you know, depending, which you basically just fold that back is all you do. So that's what I've done, is folded that back, and then I've bound, used bias binding to bind the edges. But she's also got like a boat neck like that, of different sizes. And then this is for a coat, and it kind of, you know, if you've never seen it before, it's a bit funny, but you actually put together, that's the back. It's kind of a collar that goes along the front. I don't know if you can kind of make sense of that being like a bit of a lapel collar. So these are templates, they're free templates that you can download through the Make Use website. And I'm just seeing if I can quickly, that's just the, this is the shirt, and you'll see definitely the patterns there for all necklines. So you've got the Illustrator, you can download the Illustrator file or the PDFs. Yeah, so if you round neck, here we go. I'll just pop it in, I found the actual link to that. So that's the first neckline I showed you that I just popped in. And then I think this is the, yep, this is the jacket collar neckline. And see, the wide neckline, like more of a boat neck. So these are all free, they're open source. You just need to mention Make Use. If you use it in any of your products, you just have to mention where you got it from, basically. Make Use and Holly McQuillan, but I think, did I just put that one in? I think I might have put that one in twice, but anyway, so those are free. You can explore the Make Use website. It's completely open source, so all the patterns are free to download and all the templates. And there's really interesting kind of rotation and swapping methods that you can use in zero waste as well, which you can kind of read more about. But yeah, so that's where all the necklines came from.
Sandra, with that neckline, how you cut out the U shape and then you fold it down, how do you manage the corners of the fold?
Like, you mean like here?
Yes.
What do you do with that, well, I lined this. Well, you can see I've actually got a bit of, hold on. I don't know if you can see that, but I've done a bit of like hand kind of over edge stitching there to kind of just secure that corner. But the lining has kind of been attached, and then it kind of goes underneath the kind of length here, and then it's stitched down over. But yeah, it is a bit of a funny corner. So there's just a bit of trying to see if I can get my thing to, yeah, just a bit of hand stitching there on this one. Then I can look at my other one and see. Remember what I did.
Sandra, while you're picking that one up,
yeah.
What I did with mine was I faced it with different fabric. That's actually, that's the inside you're looking at.
Okay.
That's the outside.
Yeah.
But actually, having the genius idea about the seams on the outside today, was that you, Stacey? And I'm suddenly thinking I'm missing a trick here, because obviously making a top like this, but with the facing on the outside would just be fabulous. And that was scrap fabric that somebody gave to me. So
yeah. No, it's nice as a facing as well. Like maybe just kind of give a little bit more fuller, like a fuller structure to the neckline.
It's really lovely. I mean, I can't, you are looking at the inside. I can't talk too highly of that pattern. It's very, if you haven't done a zero waist, it really makes you think, like Sandra was saying about rotation, it really makes you think things through, and you learn things by doing it. That afterwards you're like, oh right, now that makes sense. So it really challenges your understanding of what zero waste means. It's, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, and also just like volume around the body, how you can shift volume in different places and stuff. It's actually, so when I teach, or when we teach through Zero Waste Design Online, intro to Zero Waste Design, we always start with the make use pattern, that make use shirt or top, because it's really versatile, and it, yeah, just helps with that kind of initial understanding of what's possible. And it's based on a Bronze Age pattern. It's, you know, based on historical, but I'll just show you the last little bit here. There's my little guy walking in the door. I'm almost done. With my bias binding finish at the corner, I've just kind of wiggled it. You can see there's a little bit of kind of pull. I could have maybe done slightly less wide binding, but I've just kind of continued the binding down and around, but like that. So yeah. Well, I think maybe we'll wrap up because we've just gone about 10 minutes over, but we'd love to see you again for the next community call. Bring some project ideas, we can all share. I've got quite a few I've been working on for the last couple of years as well. So it'd be lovely to see you again. So yeah, the link's in the chat there. And if you have any kind of continued questions or kind of input, do follow us on Instagram. It's ZWDO_collective, and send your questions in, and we'd love to hear from you. So nice to see everyone, and we will see you hopefully in December. Okay, bye.